think we can all agree that there's nothing like finding solutions to nagging problems in our lives, or taking advantage of an opportunity that just simply seems to show up out of nowhere. This could look like landing your dream job after you have been searching for what seems like an eternity, or finding out the answer to a terrible medical issue in your life. There's a story in the Bible where the first 4 disciples witnessed the power of Jesus like they had never seen before. Now, they all had problems of their own, and one of the problems that they had was staring them right in the face. And I would have imagined this thing would have been on the forefront of their mind constantly. Let me just go into a little bit of backstory. Jesus was preaching in a synagogue, which was like Jewish church. Right in the middle of the service, a man stands up and starts to manifest demonically, meaning the demons were speaking out of this man. Jesus calmly stops the demons from speaking, thus freeing him from the prison that he was in. Now, that had never happened before. Nobody had ever been able to speak to the demonic and have the demonic put in its place and obey. It just hadn't happened. But yet, this is what took place. Now, the part of the story that I want you to really register with comes from Mark 1:29 and following, where it says, "And immediately he left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew, and James and John were with him. Now Simon's mother-in-law lay ill with a fever, and immediately they told him about her." So they witnessed this power that Jesus had, and the first thing that registered on their mind was, man, Simon's mother-in-law is really sick and she needs help. Now, this is exactly what Jesus wanted. Jesus wanted them to talk to him about this problem, and it seems to have affected all 4 of these men. Now, look at what Jesus did as a result of them simply telling him about their problem. It says, "And he came and he took her by the hand and he lifted her up, and the fever left her and she began to serve them." Now, you see the compassion of Jesus. He walks into the room. He would have walked over to her, and he just calmly picks up her hand, and the fever leaves. Now, if you can imagine the conversation that would have been going on, it would have been intense. They would have been telling him about the day that she fell sick, about her symptoms, about how this was affecting the family and the community. This is a big deal. If you've ever been around someone who has suddenly fallen really ill, it is the topic of conversation, and it can be very painful. Jesus hears all of that and then compassionately handles the situation. But it didn't stop there. It says, "That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by demons. The whole city was gathered together at the door." Now, this would have been a sight to see because it took place on the Sabbath. With Jewish culture, nobody did anything on the Sabbath, including like walking around and going places. So when the sun went down, everybody was free to get up and move around the city, and they did. And it seems like there would have been 3 classes of people that would have come to this house. It would have been the people that were sick or oppressed. It would have been the people bringing the sick and oppressed, and then it would have been the spectators. And you can imagine what happened. There's a knock on the door, and Jesus opens it up, and there's just this crowd of people. And then systematically, Jesus walks through the crowd, and listen to what the next verse says. "And he healed many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons." Now, that's the result of what he did, but you can imagine Jesus as he's walking through this crowd, bending down and hearing the stories of each person, of the hopelessness of what it's like to live with a person that's oppressed by demons, or the painful experience of what it's like to live with someone that's a cripple or a mute or a blind person. This would have been an unloading of pain onto Jesus, and Jesus took it all. Now, you have to ask the question, what's happening here? All of these people are telling Jesus about the deepest, darkest problems in their life. The problems that up to this point, there's no answers for. The doctors haven't been able to cure the sick, and there's no one that's able to deal with the demonic problem. And the conversation going back and forth would have been a real relief for those present. Now, what's actually happening is those people are talking to God. In a sense, Jesus is there physically, but since they are talking to God, they're praying. And this is what God wants us to do. Now, Jesus physically isn't present today like he was 2,000 years ago, but Jesus is omnipresent, meaning he is everywhere all at once. And that means that we can go to him and we can bring him our problems just like these people brought him their problems. So here's my advice. Go into your room where it's quiet. Close your eyes so that you can just focus. Nothing superstitious about it. And then tell Jesus exactly what's going on in your life. Tell him your problems. Tell him it unfiltered. If you have to use language that's unpleasant, then use the language that's unpleasant. Jesus can handle it. And then allow him to work in your life. Jesus wants you to talk to him. Jesus wants you in a relationship. Later in the story, Jesus dies on a cross and he raises from the dead. And what happens in that moment is he restores the relationship from man to God. And that happens through faith in him. And the way that that whole thing starts is by talking to him. So if you're a Christian or you're someone who's like, man, I don't know about this, what's the harm in going into your room and closing the door and just spending some time with you and Jesus? I guarantee it's going to change things. Thanks.